we emphasize too much about our techniques, our knowledge, our skills, but you forgot about the the engine who drive this.
Actually, about 60% of our population are Asian American. So it is definitely very important to have voices like ours to represent.
My opponent out fundraised me by a factor of 10. I decided to, do what I'm strongest at what my team is strongest at, and that is knocking on doors, talking to people directly.
佛利蒙市是美国加州旧金山湾区第4大城市，位置紧邻硅谷，被连续7年评为全美最幸福的城市。弗利蒙也是美国华裔市议员占比最高的城市，7位议员中有4位华裔。大城市中华裔议员过半，弗利蒙是唯一一个。那今天我们邀请到弗利蒙市现任副市长张雅静、市议员黄洁仪、市议员刘瑞萌，和我们谈谈这座城市华人参政的城市故事。Thank you for speaking with us, Vice Mayor Ya-Jing Zhang, Councilmember Raymond Liu, and Councilmember Teresa Khan. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us.
So, since many of our audiences may not be so familiar with your faces, could you start by introducing yourself, including your background, your previous profession, and what motivated you to enter into public service? If Rachel, you want to start?
All right. Okay. My name is, my real name is Yajing Zhang, Zhang Yajing. So I came from China and with a physics background. So I worked in high tech for 10 years. And after that, I become an independent business owner. And so during the period, and there is a position for school board, the Fremont Unified School District Board of Director. So that was the first time I ran for the office. And I went, so I served at the school district for 4 years. And after that, and I ran for city council. So now currently I'm being serving for, this is second year. And I learned a lot. And also I'm saying that, our decision has made a very positive contribution and difference to the city. I think that's what motivates me. Another thing is initially when I ran is because we need more Asian American voice. And there's not much deep thinking, but we just feel that that's what I wanted to do. And without understanding or knowing so much about politics, just think this is the right thing to do, and I want to do that. So then I jumped in. I think that motivation and follow your heart is very important. So,
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Raymond, I understand you used to be a soft engineer.
Yeah.
Do you want to start by
Yeah, sure. So, I was born and raised in the Bay Area. So, I've lived in Fremont since 2010. I've, went to all the high schools here, graduated high school here in Fremont, and then went to community college. And then I transferred to UC Davis in 2017, I think, and then graduated in 2019 with a degree in computer science. I never really thought, I'd become elected official. So I was working as a software engineer since I graduated from 2019. I moved back in the Bay Area during COVID. I was working ever since here in the Bay Area as a software engineer. And I never really thought, I'd become elected official. I ran in 2024, because I ran against an incumbent. My predecessor will be running unopposed. I just felt, the people in Fremont deserve to have a voice. Elections should be contested, and that's why I ran. So I ended up winning my election by just 41 votes. It was one of the, I think, closest elections on Fremont Council. And then since getting elected, I'm proud to say that, I'm the youngest ever Fremont City Council member ever. Got elected at the age of 27. I'm 28 now. And then, I think, it's being a city council member is obviously very different than being a software engineer. I always joke as a software engineer, you're really sitting on your butt 8 hours a day, staring at a computer screen. As a city council member, you're expected to go out there, talk to the people in your community, understand their concerns, see how you can help out to improve their lives. So it's for me, it's a lot more fulfilling of a job, really, than optimizing bug fixes and things like that. So I really enjoy it, and I really enjoy helping out people the most. And I think it's important that when we talk about diversity on elected officials, yes, it's important. We have diversity of views, we have diversity of ethnicities, and in Fremont, I'm really proud of that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah. So for Teresa, I understand that you are a restaurant owner, called Milk and Honey.
That's
Do you
correct.
do you wanna start by introducing yourself as well?
Yes. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. Thank you for having me today. And I actually, my sister and I came from Taiwan to the U.S. as a high school students, and so we actually we came here, by ourselves without our parents during high school. So we actually receive a lot of help from the community, and that is kind of why I ran for election to give back to the community. And also at that time, in 2018, Fremont went from a large election for city council members to district election. And in our district, I'm in District 1, which is also where my restaurant is at. In our district, we didn't have a representative in the city council for 12 years before that. So I felt it was, a good time to run to represent our community and represent the voices. Especially, we have a lot of first generation immigrants in Fremont. So we actually have the data that Fremont, we have more than half of our population are actually about 60% of our population are Asian American, and we have actually more than half of our residents are born outside of this country. So it is definitely very important to have voices like ours to represent a lot of people don't, they don't know how to access, resources from the city when they need help in different ways. And so it's definitely important to, be that bridge to help with people's needs.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
You mentioned that in 2017, 2018, the election system went from a large election to district-based election, and
Right.
that there were 12 years without representation on District 1,
For
the
District
North.
1, yeah. Mhm.
Was that the reason before when it was a large election?
Yeah, so when it was at large, and there were four city council members and mayor, so five members in the council. And during that election, we actually Fremont became 6 districts, and so 2 more seats. And also, so if when it's a large election, there could be so whoever run from the whole city of Fremont, and each election there will be two new seats, right? So those two new seats could be won with people from the same district. So just based on votes, right? So it's a kind of a advantage, the pros of having district elections. So in the large city like us, every district would have its representation.
Thank you. I think three of you mentioned representation, which it really matters. And also, Teresa, you mentioned that in Fremont, more than half of people are first generation immigrants and 60% are Asian Americans. And we've also pulled out some data that Asian Americans makes up 60%, while Chinese Americans 19%, and Indian Americans even at a larger share, 29%. You can correct me if it's a wrong data. But for the Chinese American representation on the city council is more than a half, which is quite a phenomenon compared to the serious misrepresentation to Asian Americans elected officials at large in the nation. So for you guys, what do you think are the factors that contributed to this phenomenon? And historically, has Asian American, Chinese American political participation in Fremont always been this strong, or the current level of representation is more of a recent development? If you have some thoughts, Rachel.
Yes, that's a very good question. Actually, you know what? I really enjoy our discussion and this forum. I think we also have some nonprofit organization like CBC, which is a Citizen for Better Community, which is the mission is to encourage civic engagement and elevate Asian Americans' social status and also contribution to the community. And from that organization, we have many, from that organization came many elected officials. But let's see. And also, they also focus on youth education and civic engagement. So I think that's one of the reasons. And the other one is we also have people who were the pioneer in our city. Let's see, I don't know who was the first one to become a school board. And then when the Asians see that, you know, there was a first Asian Chinese American school board trustee, and then we kind of follow the footstep. I think this is, but I was told that by our community leaders, and they are senior, they've been here for many years. They were told that when they first moved in, he was the only Chinese in the whole street. So he could not see, you know, there's nobody he can talk to. And I think we have come a long way to have this success. And both Raymond and Teresa and I, we three of us were elected at the same time. And that's why it's like more than half of the city council were now Asian and Americans, because this is the first time in history in Fremont. And so we made a difference, right? Three of us.
Yes.
Okay, I'll stop there.
Thank you. If Raymond or Teresa, you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just add on to that a little bit. You know, I definitely agree with that. And for me personally, you know, it's because you know I grew up in Fremont, right? Like you know when I was growing up, like you know still a student in high school and middle school, you know we were already used to seeing elected representatives in Fremont. I think you know Teresa said you were elected in 2014, right?
2018.
Oh, 2018. Okay. Yeah, back then, you know, I was still a college student at Ohlone, for example, right? So, you know, and then even when I was in high school, we had, Chinese Americans, Asian Americans elected on the city council, on the school board. So by the time when I ran in, 2024, for the first time, you know, there's already been a history, a precedent of Chinese Americans, of Asian Americans getting elected to local offices. So, you know, people like, you know, weren't exactly surprised by, you know, my ethnicity. A lot of their concerns were about my age primarily for being so young. So, and I think that's important. You know, once you have the first ever, right? And people start seeing like, oh, you know, Chinese Americans, you know, they're just like anybody else. They're just like, you know, our neighbors, they're our friends, right? You know, and there is nothing wrong out of the ordinary for us to become, you know, elected officials. Once you break down that barrier, I think, you know, the path becomes easier. People, you know, like are familiar with that. It's not a like, you know, scary prospect anymore. I think that's the very most important thing. And that's why, you know, by now, you know, it's nothing strange or abnormal for people in our great city of Fremont.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
If you have anything to add on, Teresa?
Sure. Yeah, so before Yajing and Raymond was elected last year, we actually had former Mayor May and Dr. Yang Xiao and myself were on the council together. So there were already three of us. But so I think Fremont, we're a very diverse city, and so you know we are very the residents here are very open to having, you know, a diverse council as well. So, but of course, having from three Chinese American council members to now four is a majority actually. So that's definitely first time in the history, but it so it really means that we are more civically engaged now than ever, which is really great. I think even I think during the pandemic when there were a lot of Asian hate and all that those events also shape who we are today. We need to have our voices heard more than ever, and we're also encouraging our children to be more engaged in community affairs. So it's definitely great to have Yajing and Raymond join us right now.
Actually, I want to add something.
Mhm.
Okay, so because from what Raymond said and also Teresa, I realized because Raymond was born here and he is another generation, right? Gen Z. And Teresa came here at a very young age. So it's sort of like you have I came here when I was already, pursue my master degree. So, our background is a little bit different. So I realized actually for Rima, he said he already see the city council, elected officials. And for me, it's a different landscape. You see that? Because how we grew up, we see things, what we have access are very different. So that's why I want to say, because from my background, a lot of people say, oh, my English is not that good. I cannot do public speaking. I cannot do this and that. And but I think you don't have to run for the elected official if you don't think you're ready. But at least you can go to city meetings or school board meetings. You can contribute. You can raise issues. You can also suggest solutions, and that's very important. That's how we develop leadership and involvement. And I think that's the thing I'm going to call out. I want everyone that listening to this forum and don't think your language is a shortcoming because that's where you come from. And if you have accent, so be it. And because we are compete not because of how perfect we speak the language, is how deep you're thinking. And that we can compete. That's where you can add value. As long as people can understand you, I don't think that's a problem because that's where you came from. That's part of you. You don't try to hide. And I think that's my view on that. So I feel like people, and also another thing is people think, oh, politics is dirty. I don't want to get involved. And when I'm doing my campaign, I walk on the street like everyone else. And I try to talk to people about I'm running, so here's my issues. And some people would not even listen. Because actually, if you volunteer and you would change your view about politics, I think it's very strategic. It's a leadership. It's a collaboration. When you understand that, of course, some people would do dirty work, give politics a bad name. But, you can be a different kind of elected officials. And that's up to you. How do you conduct yourself? And I think that if you want the community to be better and you see yourself as capable, you should. I mean, I would like to see all of us contribute. And in whatever level we feel, we are ready.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think a lot of our audiences are first generation immigrants as well. A lot of them are from mainland China, from what we understand now. So what you shared are very encouraging. Let's dive into the campaign process. Whereas also where Yajing, you were addressing, there are certain fears for people to get into politics. Part of the reason is that we understand that you need a lot of resources and support. For instance, people, money. So when we interview Councilman Shaoyang, he also mentioned that he was very on board with supporting Asian Americans to represent the city council. So what do you think are the most impactful reasons that have led the voters to cast their votes for you? In another word, why motivate voters to support you and not others when you were elected 2018 or 2024?
Mm-hmm.
So if you can elaborate on that. I understand you all have different experiences, but it would be very interesting for our audience to hear.
Okay, I will start because I think when you say what is the most important thing for you to run a successful campaign, I think that why you are running for this position is most important. So when I was running in 2019, and I knew this school board opportunity only, I think, about 10 days before the deadline. And at that time, I heard a lot of complaint at the chat group about school board, about this education and class choices and sex education, etc. But then when it comes to a lot of people are involved with the schools, but nobody came to say I'm going to run, and they were looking for candidates. And when I saw this, I was honest, I was not very much involved with class, choices and active in the parents group. But I feel I want to do this because I just feel, we always complain, but when it's time to take action, somebody has to do it. And so I have to figure out where to register. I have no idea. So you see, I'm completely a newbie. So I find it's like at Alameda County, and then I just registered because there was a 7 days before the deadline. So that's what I did. And then things just happened because the community was looking for a leader. And when you sign up, and then people would come to contact you, and then we form a team. So I think that why you're running, in my case, is the most important. That's also sort of like a startup, right? You can have all the techniques, you can have all the knowledge, but your why is not strong enough. You cannot pull it through. So I feel like maybe we as the Chinese, we emphasize too much about our techniques, our knowledge, our skills, but you forgot about the engine who drive this, the engine who drives you. I think this is the most important. And when you speak to other people, they can relate to you. And then that's why you form a team. And then that's why people would come, because you come as a very authentic person and your reason just come through. For me, that's it. Then when I started, I signed up, and then many volunteers would form a campaign team, and they're still with me during my second election. So kudos to my team. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question on that.
Okay.
What was the specific vision you want to cast? In another word, what changes did you want to see specifically that had motivated you to dive into public service, to run for city council?
Well, that Chinese, we always say, 就是什么自扫门前雪嘛，中国人什么自扫门前雪，或者中国人就是一个人，this has to be Chinese，你一个人很厉害，但是到了一个团体就不是那么厉害。But I thought that, okay, maybe that's the case. But then somebody has to change that. Instead, we always complain. But why can't you be the change? And so I always feel like the change always come from you. Otherwise, stop complaining. If you complain of something, come with a solution as well. So instead of complaining to maybe we have some, culture, we always talk about that. But I think that our Chinese community is coming very strong over the years. And I do see a lot of community members, we support each other. And I don't want to see that, I want to be the example, but it's kind of you go to do the right thing, and it just, come out like this. I want to see that more Chinese American, Asian American, become vocal and become more active in community involvement. Let's say with city, we have plans, we have surveys that we want to build this park. What feature do you want? We have police department, and what is your priority? And I want our people, the community members, be engaged and give your voice, get your voice heard. Because some people say, I don't want to vote because there's nothing to do. I hate politics. But the time gradually you make yourself unimportant, unrelatable, and you make yourself how to say you make yourself on the borderline because people don't care because you don't get your voice heard, and next time people is not going to ask you what's your important, and when you don't have your vote and you don't belong to the society. And the question I always ask, when they say, oh, how do we become the mainstream? And to be honest, it never occurred to me like I'm not mainstream because you have to see yourself as a mainstream and you behave accordingly. Why you're not mainstream?
Thank you. For Raymond and Teresa, what was your process like in terms of being elected?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I was running against an incumbent, and that was already an uphill battle. In the U.S., incumbents win, I think, 97 or 98% of the time, right? So when I ran, I came in as a young. I was 26 when I declared my intention to run. So I came in like relatively unknown. I wasn't elected previously. I also wasn't that well known in the community, so it was hard, right? To get endorsements, it was a really hard process for me. I only got the endorsements of our mayor at that time. Uh, and then Yang Xiao, I think, was the only other person who endorsed me, right? So that was, a very hard for me. And then my team as well, it was just me and a couple of my friends who were still in college. So me and 2 to 3 college students. And fundraising was also very difficult. I only fundraised, I think, 8 to 9 thousand, while my opponent out fundraised me by a factor of 10. She had close to $100,000 in the bank. So we were facing an uphill battle in every way, shape, and form. But I decided to do what I'm strongest at what my team is strongest at, and that is knocking on doors, talking to people directly. For a lot of these local races, when you knock on somebody's door, and these local races should be all about people in the community. So I personally knocked on around 5,000 doors in my campaign. I talked to a lot of people, and they told me this was the first time that anybody had knocked on their door for any reason related to an election, right? So I was really able to connect to a lot of people. I told them my vision for, like, and then why I'm running, all that sort of stuff, and I guess I managed to get enough people to agree with me, and then the funds I had, I used that all, for yard signs. Every time I talked to somebody, they really agreed with me. I'd ask them, "Hey, do you mind putting up my yard sign to really show that?" They'd say yes. I'd also, reach out to, my community, like, my friends, my old high school friends, my friends from college, get them involved. And then it was really like as grassroots as it gets. So we didn't have like, fundraising, all that stuff. The only thing we had to do was we had young people, we have energy, we have passion. So we went around knocking on as many doors as possible, talk to them, and that's how I ended up winning the election.
Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing. Yeah.
Mhm.
What about Teresa?
Yes. So I ran for election, as I shared earlier, in 2018. That was Fremont went into a district-based election, and so District 1, we were actually a new district, so to speak, because we didn't have any representative on the council at that time. So there were 3 of us running for this open seat. So it was myself, and there was an Indian American person, and also a Caucasian candidate. And so I think because for all 3 of us, we were completely new. We were all first time candidates. So it was a pretty contentious election, but I think we all knocked on doors, and we went on forums, and I think the most important people, when I spoke with people that were the neighbors, and they were very they were also very happy to see me at their door. And actually there was one story where someone said, oh, when they saw me approach the door, and he was like, oh, I'm not I don't want to you're a Democrat, I don't want to talk to you. And then when I talked to him, I still try to introduce myself, and and want to do for our community. And he actually said, he looked at I have a shirt on my name. And then he saw my name. He's like, Oh, you're Teresa. I already voted for you. I already mailed. I'm about to mail the ballot in today. So I think that kind of speak for what people, because he received my mailer in the mail, and he saw what I wanted to do for the community. So I think what's most important is what people see as what your where you stand and what you how you want to make a difference for your community, and that's the most important. So yeah, so people, there are most of the neighbors I talk to are very friendly and very encouraging in that process. When it was the for us it was the first time is always the hardest time. So like Raymond shared, yeah. So I'm also encouraged by my colleagues. They're sharing today some of the stories I'm hearing for the first time. So yeah, so I think it's great that we are able to participate in this American democratic process.
From what I understood, you were running a restaurant at the time, and there were no representation at the time. What was the turning point for you to go into politics in a way?
Okay. Yeah. So, I because my restaurant is also in my district, right? So, I live here, I employ, and, I meet, so at that time, I think, the restaurant has been here for a little more than 10 years now. And so, we, at that time, maybe only we were around for about 3 years, but we meet a lot of neighbors every day. Families come in to eat, a lot of regular customers, and we share a lot of issues. And whether it's about education or about our a lot of issues in our community. So I think that also encouraged me to run. But I also wanted to share that I actually won the election by I think more than 20% over the second highest vote getter. So it was very encouraging to see that my what I wanted to run, like align with what the neighbors wanted to see. And so since then, I'm on the council for it's my third term that I'm serving right now. So I'm definitely very honored to be serving our community.
Thank you for sharing. To understand a little bit about Fremont's election and governing system, so in 2017, Fremont transitioned from at-large elections to district-based elections, following concerns under the California Voting Rights Act. At the time, the city received a letter from an attorney stating that Fremont's electoral system displays racially polarized voting, and this shift has made it easier for Asian Americans candidate to participate in politics. Is that correct? And follow up on that, since now this is a district-based election and governing system, can you describe a little bit about the demographic characteristics of your respective districts, of the district that you represent, and what were the work that you are doing in your own district, if you can be specific?
The Fremont's overall demographics, and we have a also large, maybe even a larger, slightly larger Asian population in District 1. And because Ardenwood, in our district, we have a so Fremont, if I go back to the history a little bit, Fremont was actually formed by 5 little towns back 60 years ago. And so, but our district, Ardenwood and, Northgate and the Lakes and Birds, we are actually not part of the original 5. So, 5 towns and now 6 districts. So, we're kind of the newer kind of parts of town where some of our developments came in later. So, we have some of the probably the newer immigrants, and so that kind of also maybe part of the reason why we have a slightly higher Asian population. But which also means that like services like public safety and parks and things like that are important to our community. So since then I really advocated for more, because we're in the northmost part of the city, so we're also further from the Fremont main police station, and so sometimes we don't see like a lot of patrolling of the police because sometimes are short in staffing. So I've been advocating for making sure that we have enough police patrolling, and having a lot of town halls that people can meet with, our neighbors can meet with our police officers, or sometimes the police chief come down to meet with us, so they can talk face to face, and they can share their concerns directly with the police chief and other city kind of department directors. And we also actually have a lot of improvements in our parks in the last few years. So I'm really kind of pretty proud to be part of this process where our needs are being communicated and worked on by the city.
And for Yajing and Raymond, can you briefly share what's the demographic characteristic like in your district?
Okay. So I'm from District 5, which is the largest in area, because district is divided by population, but from the area, the coverage, and the District 5 is the largest, which also include a lot of high-tech companies, including Tesla, including Land Research, Western Digital, etc. So I think that in my district, there's a heavy concentration of advanced manufacturing company and data center hardware manufacturers. And so that's why we have a smart innovation center in Warm Spring. So my platform is homeless, public safety, and also economic development and workforce. And because also I come from have a physics degree and working high tech for for many years, and I'm very in tune with the trend and development. And also currently I serve as California's Policy and Transparency Committee, and we're talking about AI's influence on workforce displacement. And so those things are very important. So I want to study those issues, and so learn from my colleagues and give my inputs. Because I think that high tech, we see that there is recently there is more layoff from Oracle and from other major high tech company. And I think as government, we should have come with some kind of policy to help those people, the high tech engineers, and to migrate to different areas. And so I'm in touch, with some other people in this kind of conversation. And what else? I think another thing is workforce, because we have software. We have now that the 2 years program, such as what should we call the 2 years program, and we need contractors, plumbers, and electricians. All these are in demand. So we need to also emphasize and help those students or people to educate them so that we can come through those. I feel that there will be the next 2 years will be very challenging.
So I'm from District 6, the Irvington area. So my district's actually the smallest land size wise, right? We have the most apartments in here. There's still like, a little bit of the blue collar working class left in my district. But the reason why I felt I won was because of my shared history and connection, right? uh, to this area. Like I said, I grew up here. I know a lot of I'm friends, some of my friends, their parents, my friends might have moved away, but their parents are still here in Fremont. And some of the same doors I knocked, when talking to people, were the same doors I knocked on 15 years ago for something like Halloween or for when for some high school projects, right? So people knew of me, right? And while they were surprised that like, oh, I decided to enter politics, a lot of them were really happy to support me in that way. So that unique characteristic is one of the things I like about Irvington, about my home. The other part is when you get into the demographics of this district, I think District 6, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is the most diverse. There's not one single ethnicity that has an outright majority here. So it's purely the most diverse. You have people from like all walks of life, right? You have people working in tech like myself. You have people working in blue collar, whether it's like like working in hospitals as nurses and things like that. So it's like District 6 is I think a microcosm of the whole of the Bay Area. At this local level, right? We're focused on the small things, right? Everybody wants to have the trash taken out on time. Everybody wants to have the road paved, right? That's all things as a community we can agree on, right? So it's really about solving issues for people and making sure that people are safe living here. People are happy and all that things that go along with it.
Mm.
Mhm.
Thank you. Now we can go into the governing part. We understand that you are representing your own district. In
Mhm.
the meantime, you're part of city council. So when it
Mhm.
comes to decisions or policy issues, you have to make a decision um, by voting, from what we understand. Um, do you guys generally vote together on policy issues, or do you often take different positions? And if I may ask, what are your party affiliations?
Okay. Wow. So, uh, I am independent. I can see that before I was running for the office, I was a Democratic. And also, I'm a business owner. I mean, this is for everyone to know because that's also people, I think people should not be judged by you're Democratic or Republican because these days this label is very undefined, And when I was running for campaign, I talked to two Republicans, and they were asking about my view on, let's see, which president I should vote for. Of course, I could not comment on that. But then they tell me they are all Republican. When we'll vote for Trump, when we're not. You see, so the label in the party, I think it's very hard to judge by the labels, I would say. But
Mm,
anyway, so my background is I was a Democratic, and also I'm a business owner. And when I try to invest in some properties, I I see that the rules and the policies are really unfriendly to business owner. And and then it basically it's like business owner is the enemy of the society, in my view, based on the policy. I'm like, I cannot do that. So I switched to be independent. But that's before I was have any intention of running.
mm,
And so I stayed as a independent. And I want to tell anyone who's listening, and I think we should always communicate with each other and not judge people by the label. So we vote in public in our meetings, and I think we have a really good relationship among our members. And most time I think we vote uh, the same, but sometimes we vote differently. But we're always having a very respectful professional relationship, and it doesn't affect our personal relationship. But that, at
mm.
least in my view, I mean, also that's how I look at why we sometimes vote differently. It's normal to me.
Since you represent different interests at time.
Right, and a different, I think, urgency. For example, let's see, homeless versus public safety. Just give example. Maybe for me, from District 5, I think public safety is the most urgent thing. Oh, I need to, invest money in that. And maybe from Raymond and Teresa, the homeless, they have lots of encampment. I just give example. I mean, I made up the story. And they would say, oh, this is too urgent. They got their people calling on them all the time, like solve the problem. And they would say, oh, this is the most. So then we see from our views, we are different. But then we can always share like what is most important. And we agree, okay, let's solve this problem first. And it comes to the encampment second. And that's just how we look at things. We come together.
So do you have any, for Raymond and Teresa as well, any specific examples when your votes differ? What are the main reasons? And is it primarily due to differences in district interests or from what you yourself represented?
Right. So first off, I'll start off, the party affiliation. I'm a Democrat. I've been a Democrat my whole life. I first registered to vote when I was 18, and I think around 2015 or 2016, something like that. So I registered to vote as a, excuse me, I registered to vote as a Dem, and I've been that my whole life, right? But as you might know, elections for city council are officially non-partisan. So, we don't have like the Democratic or Republican or independent like labels on there when we run. But as for voting, I think if you look back on the voting history of this particular city council, we voted the same way, I think 99% of the time, because like I mentioned before, at the local level, you're really mainly focused on, making sure that the roads are paved, that, everybody can, enjoy the parks, that the parks are open, that we have recreational access for everybody. So on these local issues, we tend to have, a unanimous agreement most of the time, right? There are a couple contentious votes that came up where, like, we had some people voting no, some people voting yes. The most recent one was the voting to kickstart the process of establishing a city charter. So a little bit background, in California, you either have a general law city, which Fremont currently is, or you can have a city charter where, the city can draft like its own constitution of sorts, right? And we recently kickstarted that process off for our city. It was viewed as, really important, for the city to continue evolving. Like Teresa mentioned earlier, our city used to be 5 separate, really small towns, a very like rural area. It was a lot of orchards and stuff like that incorporated into one. So, and then back then the population was, I think, 10 times as less, maybe 50,000 people, something like that. And now we're up to 230,000, I think. So that was, a recent view for us to kickstart off that process. I voted for it, and I think so did everybody on this call. But we had 2 people who voted against it, and their reasoning was, it's not like they were against the city charter process per se, but they thought, we were moving too fast, and we should, maybe delay it to 2028. And again, those type of disagreements, it's really valued in like, this process, right? We are a democracy, right? Of course, everybody's gonna have like, different opinions, different views of that sort. But I think it's important, like we all represent, each individual communities, and then we're supposed to work for, the city as a whole. So in that process, maybe some communities, prefer to, further evolve our city. Some other council members want to, take a slower, small step forward and things like that. But yeah.
Thank you. Teresa, if you have something to add.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So I'm a registered Democrat since I first ran for election in 2018. And I think, like Councilmember Raymond shared, most of the issues that we discussed on the council are political and, just getting the services to our community. And so, I think we agreed on most of the votes that we vote for. And sometimes, even if you're either a Democrat or Republican or, or independent, there's a whole, spectrum of Democratic on different issues, right? So for me, I'm more of a moderate Democrat. I'm not like super progressive, and so that, and then for someone else, even within the if even as fellow Democrats, we may disagree on different issues. So, or I could agree on the same issue with someone who's a Republican or someone who's independent. So I think it doesn't really necessarily mean that we would vote on issues differently. So I think because like previously shared, we are nonpartisan for in local elections, and I think our purpose is to how to best serve our community in our capacity.
So for since all of you are Asian American city councils, are there any actions that you have taken collectively as Chinese American, Asian American leaders in governance and decision making? As I think Yajing also mentioned, like she wanted the representation for Asian Americans to be more as part of the reason why she voted, why she was elected, right? Are there any specific examples were there anything that you collectively did as to, if there are not, that's totally fine. Just curious. I think our audience is curious as well. As of like, what does it look like as now half of your city council members are Asian Americans, Chinese Americans? So if there's any specific examples.
Okay, maybe let's Carissa. She has to leave soon. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So you go first.
Okay, sure. So I would say that like previously, Councilmember Liu shared about the recent charter city proposal that we are considering. The city is considering. So I actually most of us on the city council who are Asian Americans, we actually see the importance of for Fremont to be potentially become a chartered city. A lot of times in the past, even now, a lot of the residents think that, oh, we are serving on the Fremont City Council. We have, all the power to change everything, or to carry out all the everything that we're trying to do, but which is not the case under the current government structure. And they think that we're full-time staff, we have a lot of resources, and which we don't. So that's kind of our limitations when we're serving under with the current structure of the government. And so I think that's something that if we are able to carry it through and getting it on the ballot and getting the support of the people, I think that will really help us better serve our community better.
Thank you. I understand you have to leave now, but I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today, and really appreciate your.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll comment on that. So collectively, yes, we support the charter and start the process. We have formed a committee to study the charter structure, to come up with a content and proposal to see what Fremont charter look like. And actually, this proposal to start a charter, I initiated because I feel like coming from the school board, and we have a lots of more involvement in the decision making and collaboration. And when it comes to the city, it's a different what should I say? It's a different structure, and so in order to, for the city, we become bigger and bigger, and how to make it more efficient and transparent. I think mostly when we say, how do we make ourselves as an elected official more accountable to the community members? And the structure is a really important element to look into. So, for example, so current general city, the mayor cannot decide on the agenda. So agenda for every meeting drives the priority. If the mayor cannot decide what's come to on the agenda, so that means we failed to direct our priorities. And so that I was constantly get people say, why we want to change, or looking to become a charter, because the system is not broken. I said, well, first of all, I want to tell, because you are not in the daily management or governance, so you don't know. And we know that. And when we cannot set up the priority and drive the agenda, we cannot say our priority gets fulfilled by the end of the year. And so that cannot be done by the general city. That's first of all. And we are the only one not being chartered. I think this is not the proposal I initiated is not for the Chinese American. It's really for the benefit of the city. We are the happiest city in the nation, but how can we become the most advanced, most effective city? Because you know that Austin, Texas is a great example. And also San Jose City, they're doing a great job in solving homeless issues. And I think if we want to see fast change and efficiency and effectiveness, we seriously need to look into this and push it forward. So that one, fortunately, we have Raymond, Teresa, and the majority of us are on board together. But this is done for the benefit of everyone. And even though we represent, Asian American, but when we elected, we are working for the whole Fremont. Even though that's we represent a different district, but we still overall make a decision based on the overall betterment of Fremont.
So even when you were in the election process, actually, it couldn't work well if you say I'm just only representing Asian Americans or Chinese Americans. You have to support and get support from all people groups in Fremont. Is that correct?
Absolutely, because when you are elected official, you understand the Asian American, you maybe have a first-hand experience and with Asian American, their issues, and then you can represent their voice better. And really, it's a bridge, I feel. It's like you bring their issues to the overall community. Because if you don't have the voice, people don't know. They think we are the model minority, everything is good, and we are the one taking jobs away, et cetera, et cetera. But now you come on board, you tell them, we have also low-income Asian American. We are just as everyone else. And we have struggles. And when it comes to education, admission, that's why college admission, we can get our voice heard as well. And absolutely, after you get elected, you would get the people you represent voice heard, and also you particularly understand Asian Americans' issue. So then you can be a bridge to tell the public, here's the issue. But you absolutely would represent everyone. So they are all my citizens, right? They're all my children, right? So you would care for everyone. But then you know which kids needs. Maybe other people don't know. You tell them, here's the thing. I know better, right? And then that's how we say, okay, let's say we're Asian American culture and we celebrate. Why do we do that? Because we want everyone knows the Chinese American culture, Lunar New Year, Spring Festival. And because when you know each other better, you would support each other, right? So when I was invited to Indian holiday or something, their dancing, their culture is just amazing. So in in the views that we really appreciate, all groups and the different ethnic groups just enriched our city's culture. It's American culture. Yeah, is we don't see the difference, but we see the commonality and also the enrichedness of each group's brain, and we are the bridge builder. That's my view.
So following up on that, Raymond, you can jump in as well, is that as a Chinese American, as Asian American, what are the voices that you felt like you had a chance to voice in versus before when people had a misunderstanding or misconception or when things happen that are not of interest, particularly to the Chinese American, Asian American groups? I ask this question is also because we understand that in the nation at large, the Asian American, Chinese American representation in elected officials are very low, statistically wise. But for Fremont, this is a kind of like a case study for people who are looking at Chinese American representations in elected officials. So are there any specific examples that you felt like you yourself or as a team in the city council have bridged, as Rachel, you also mentioned that you serve as a bridge? We know that, of course, we care for everyone because you are the city council, right? But this is what we particularly are curious about.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, like as everybody else mentioned, and like I think you just brought up, on the city council, you're supposed to represent everybody, not like everybody in Fremont, not just the people in your district, right? You're supposed to be an advocate for everybody. But I think in particular, Chinese Americans, Asian Americans, I think overall, we place a high emphasis on education, right? That's one of the main points that I think, is that other, people who are not well connected with Asian Americans might miss. There's a high emphasis on education, and that I think, even though we're on the city council, I know Yajin used to be on the school board, for example, but that also drives a lot of, engagement with people, right? I understand that myself. I think that's one of the reasons why I grew up here in Fremont. My parents moved us to Fremont because, they like the public schools here in Fremont, right? And that's why, how I'm here right now. And I think just the opportunity for your children to have like a good life, a better life than their parents is, right? That's one of the main motivations I think why immigrant people and like people of all groups really decide to live here in Fremont. That's one of the reasons why we're ranked as the happiest city in America, and it's for that reason why the interest of like public safety was mentioned, right? People want to have their kids feel safe, right? They want to have their kids grow academically, but also be able to play with their friends, right? Be able to play in the park outside without close supervision. And I think that's important. On the city council we put public safety as a core interest, right? Because it's important residents feel safe here. They feel safe going to the parks. They feel safe having their kids bike to their friend's house and hang out. And I think that's one of the core interest groups that really indicate that's shows like a connection to the Asian American population. The other thing is economic growth, right? It's important that people can be able to have good jobs here in Fremont, right? That Fremont, our city, remains physically sound. And I guess like specific like more like culturally ethnic things, this I think happened before I came in on the council. We also recognize that diversity in Fremont, right? 2 months ago, it was lunar, right? New Year's. So we had flag raising ceremonies in Fremont. We recognize that. We recognize all sorts of groups. Like Yajin mentioned, there was Diwali for the Indian Americans. We recognize that as well. Ramadan for the Muslim Americans. We have one of the biggest Muslim American populations in America, so we also recognize that. And then just yesterday, we recognized Autism Awareness Month, right? So, we make sure to recognize that, yes, Fremont's diverse, and that's why we're the happiest city in America. Make sure to recognize, the contribution that every resident in Fremont gives to our city. And I think that's, an important part that, that we're able to push for. And I think we listen to our constituents' concerns. when they want to have, their local city government recognize something, that's something we also do as well. So yeah, I also have to go after this question. I have another event at 11. We're having a coffee with the cops thing, again, to, like there's another public safety aspects. Our police are, proactively engaged with our community. They love to have these events, where they show up at a place, right, a local coffee shop. They invite residents all over, and sometimes we, the council members, show up as well. It's a nice place, for the regular average day Joe to grab a cup of Joe, right, and then talk with their police officers, understand what our police community is doing for them. Talk to me like their city council member of this area. See how I can work to help them make sure their interests are heard on the council as well. But yeah, I want to just thank you again for this conversation. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you for joining us.
So actually, I need to go to the coffee with the cop as well. But I think very importantly, this is our audience is Asian American. And when Raymond said, Asian American emphasize on education, and but then how does that mean why there is fewer elected Asian American leaders? And here's my analysis and observation. We emphasize education and we want our kids to have the highest paid jobs. But you forgot is you all Asian American, you all have to come as a foundation, which is you have to stand on an elevated social platform. And then your children can move ahead. Because that's why people talk about there is bamboo ceilings. Because maybe the society views Asian American as a worker, perfect, excellent, and just employees. And they don't see us group as a leadership type. You see, so that's why everyone has the responsibility if you want support your children to be the leaders and in any field. So sometimes when I ask people to volunteer for, let's say, nonprofit organization or join a campaign, ask their kids to join a campaign, and they would see that, oh, maybe I think this would divert their children's time from study to, something which is not relatable. But actually, in the grand scheme, they're all interconnected. Actually, what we do is really help us, you, your children, to move to a higher level. And that's why we also see in high tech, in any political landscape, that I think Chinese American can do way better because we are all part of the reason and we can be all part of the changes.
I think we wanted to explore what are the differences between first generation versus people who grew up here as Chinese Americans. Also, do you see a difference in terms of Indian Americans, for instance? They are also Asian Americans, right? But their political participation is different in terms of the intensity, the level of participation.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge difference.
Yeah.
We can get into a different topic because that's the reason I ran the school board. So, during 2018, when Teresa said that we redistrict, and then, so my district, I think it's District 4 for school board. We have different district, school board and versus city, we have different district. So there was an opening position for school board in my area. And nobody stood up. And I mean, why? Because there was a lot of time that you have to invest in school board meetings. I mean, the meeting goes from 4 o'clock till midnight, from 2 o'clock, and every 2 weeks. I don't know why other people maybe consider, oh, my kids in school, and I have a full-time job, I don't have time. Oh, my kids are no longer in school. What's the point for me to become a school board? So if you don't want to run, you always have reasons. But if you want to run, you always have reasons, right? When I was a school board, the Indian American, the kids, they would come up, they would talk about issues. They are very vocal, they are very mature. And what's shocking is we have a school spotlight program. every so often we would have select different schools and the student member to come to speak to us, report their school spotlight. Usually the team consists of a principal, a PTA, a chair, and a student chair. And I would say 99% of the time, the student representative is Indian American. So I don't know why, but that's just a phenomenon. So, but I want the parents to look into that. Don't do that for your kids. Ask them to speak up. Speak up. Public speaking. Public speaking is a skill, but then just get things done and don't afraid of raising questions. Speak. And also parents, don't worry about your accent. Speak with your accent. That's not a problem because you're coming from China. And if you're not having an accent, that would be weird, right? And just don't focus on that. We are all well educated and you have a depth of mind, wisdom, and you can come up with something and nobody compete with you, even they speak native language, right? They just cannot see that far. So always compete with your strengths. I mean, right now, I would say at the local level, we have more, in the nation, at the local level, we have more Chinese American elected officials. But at the federal and national level, we see more Indian American leadership. So that tells us we need to think big. We need to be more audacious because we are good. We need to let our talent shine through. But most importantly, we need to have courage. Courage is the most important thing, and passion and heart. I want to emphasize the heart is more important than the mind. Because most time I think as Asian, Chinese American, I don't know, Indian American, we emphasize on the criteria, your education certificates. You have bachelor, master, PhD. But we forget about the most important part, which is your heart, which is like, what should I say? Because the heart drives everything. If you don't have it, you don't have the engine. It's not going to go anywhere. You would reach mediocre outcome. To protect your heart and let the flame of your heart, be always burning with flame and passion.
I think there's this mindset of people think that what are we gonna change? We just I think there's a mindset of just pursuing the American dream, just live a good life. Even if we're in politics, what are we gonna change? And especially for people coming from mainland China, we interviewed Xue Haipei, who has been very politically active in the States for decades. And he mentioned this cultural mindset, this rooted issue of there's no experience similar to a democracy system back, historically in China.
Right.
So I think a lot of people come in with this mindset, which is part of our culture too.
Okay, all right. But I feel like there's no excuse. You're here for 30 years. And if you're here for 5 years, and you know what? I feel like because you don't think it's important. When you think it's important, you're going to dive in instantly. When Chinese American, very smart people. And so when you think something is important, you get yourself plugging right away. And I just think at the bigger scale, we don't realize that's very important for our group overall. Because, what should I say? I mean, Chinese American are very hardworking, but I want our people to think at a bigger level. When the platform of Asian American is high, then everyone benefit. And so what is a good Asian American profile, I think we all can be the part of being an example, or we inspire others and get inspired.
And that
And
Mhm.
right. I mean, I feel like sometimes we always look for solutions. We look for other people to rescue us. But don't forget, you have so much power and you can be the change yourself. And also, I feel we all need a group, such as this forum. You know, when people are listening, they say, oh, that we're discussing this. And also when you mentioned, Xue Haipei and etc., I think you're doing a great job in getting us in a platform. I hope there are more and more, you would have more people to become your listener. And that's how we grow. And so then we influence each other, we help each other. Because you see that the Jewish community, they are very big in technology, entertainment, politics, medical, whatever field. I don't know what they do, but the point is we need to help each other. We need to help Asian American, and then at the same time contribute to United States, the country we live in, right? Because you're only going to be like selfish. Okay, we only help ourselves, and then you still have no influence. But basically, you are doing the good for our brothers and sisters, and also we are doing good for the world overall. That's it, right?
And last question, what is your Northern Star?
Oh, wow, that's a very deep question. My Northern Star. North Star. I think for me, I always freedom and authenticity and being truthful to myself. Being truthful to myself means free. I think that's important. That's it. That is my North Star. Because everything else of what do I do, it changes with when it's just the way I do things. Because I'm always true to myself. At different age, and when we are young, we want to make money, right? Being true to yourself. I mean, kids, I mean, encourage you to make money and don't think, oh, if you don't get involved in politics, something is not good. I'm better than you. No, because at a different age, we want to do different things. First, you want to make money. And then after you make money, and maybe you are curious about, other people, the surroundings, how you help other people. How do you help the society, the community we call hometown better? And it's just something natural to do because you don't want to be the one always benefiting from others. You can contribute. I always believe that if you see yourself as a capable person, you should do something. Because unless you don't see yourself as a capable person, you always seek. See, when you seek all the time, you tell the universe, I'm poor. I always need, I always seek. But when you help, you send a message to the universe. I'm a rich person. I can help you. I can give. So, and I believe in a lot of spiritual practice. And whatever feels good, and whatever feels you can look at yourself in the mirror, I think that's good enough. And for me, it's like being truthful to yourself. And people sometimes ask me, oh, do you want to run again? Or what, at the time when I was running for school board, they would ask me, so if you fail, would you run again in another 4 years? I'm like, well, I don't know. Because maybe during the 4 years, I have something better or more exciting. So I cannot guarantee that. So that is my truthful answer. Because that's how I live my life. Well, that's how I live my life. That's my North Star.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our discussion and best wishes for your program. And if you have some other topic or if you have audience who want to have other questions, I'd like to be engaged because overall, we want to help first our Asian American, group, right? to do better, to be more influential. That's first and foremost, because when we do better, we can contribute to the society,
Mm,
right?
yes. Thank you
Yes.
so much. Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you.